and thank you for attending our panel. Today we would like to discuss the issue of supply chain, which is perceived as one of the main cyber-related threats to organizations globally. Today's panel will seek potential preventive solutions to these threats. My name is Shani, Head of Regulation and Supply Chain Risk Management in Israel National Cyber Directorate. The October 7th war demonstrated once again how much supply chains are vulnerable, potentially being organizations' weakest spot. Supply chains are still estimated to represent the easiest entry point to exploitation of networks and data by many threat actors. The number of cyber attacks on organizations in Israel is estimated to have increased by 300% since October 7th, with supply chains being the most common attacked access point. Recently, in attempts to assist organizations in their supply chain risk management process, INCD published the recent version of its National Vendor Questionnaire. Version 1.4 National Vendor Questionnaire presents common national language for supply chain risk assessment, which contains 95 controls that make sure what the provider is required to be in order to secure its customers and how it is required to implement it. In addition to that questionnaire, INCD constantly collaborates with regulators and strategic partners for enhancing supply chain resilience. In that context, today's panel will unveil for the first time a tailor-made module in the new version of the National Vendor Questionnaire, which was specifically customized in a joint effort of INCD, regulators, and private sector partners to meet supply chain challenges in the banking and the credit card industry. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to invite to the stage our distinguished panelists. Mr. Meshulam, cybersecurity architect, supply chain certified auditor, Mrs. Aya Head of Cyber Defense Units at the Banking Supervision Department of Bank of Israel. Mr. Micha Weis, Head of Financial Cyber Unit, Ministry of Finance, Israel. Mrs. Sheila Kasserly, Director of Digital Policy, North America at Schneider Electric. Mr. Dan Pastor, Director of Product Management. And Mrs. Dalit Kasvi-Shetner, Head of Cybersecurity Strategy, Bank of Auditor. So let's hear some data on supply chain cyber attacks. Cyber attacks on supply chain are currently at 20% of data leak incidents. In 2023, 245,000 attacks to supply chain were recorded. The cumulative damage that year was estimated at approximately $46 billion, while in 2024, the damage is expected to climb to $60 billion. Within a year, until April 2023, an estimated proportion of 61% of businesses in the United States were affected by attacks to a third party, while 98%, listen up, 98% of organizations reported that at least one of the manufacturers of software they use has experienced an attack in the last 2 years. So now let's hear about some incidents. In November 2023, Signature IT, a hosting service which also provides implementation services for B2B and B2C e-commerce, knowledge management, and digital services, was targeted by a two-front attack group, which is estimated to be associated with Iran. The attack, which included hacking into signature IT and their customer servers and deleting their data, which disabled the activity of some 40 operators of online trade websites and the commercial activity of their customers, including Keter, Osem, Strauss, as well as government entities such as the Natural and Bank Authority and the Ministry of Health. In another case, a global one, in May 2023, a supply chain type cyber attack was carried out on the company Moving Transfer, known for its services for transferring sensitive files securely to many organizations, which used a zero-day vulnerability that allowed hackers to inject SQL commands and access the company's customer database. The attack affected over 2,600 organizations, the vast majority are from the States, including large entities such as the BBC, British Airways, and the information of more than 77 million people was stolen, such as their employee data, including social security numbers, bank details, and more. So, as much as I know you all probably want to hear me all day long, let's hear our panelists. What changes do you see in the last year in the types and the frequency of the attack and the method of enhancing resilience of response? And what is your input regarding these changes? And what are you doing to prevent these attacks? Sharon.
Good morning. Good morning. First and foremost, I would like to thank Shani and the conference organizers for inviting me to this estimated and important time. As mentioned this week in the conference by Mr. Gabi Portnoy, the head of the Israel National Cyber Directorate, we are the national, and from the Israel National Technical Agency, we are the fifth most targeted cyber attack organization globally. Over the past year, especially since October 7 in the Iron Sword War, we have observed an increase in direct and indirect attempts to attack government services, including the supply chain-based attack. As an organization guiding government's ministries, we witness that sophistication involved in attacks likely incorporating AI and advanced techniques. For example, phishing emails are no longer easily detected by different systems. They customize to be legitimate and be targeted to specific employee. And also today, it's easy to create a phishing site closely look like an original website. If I'm speaking in the software world, like Shani said, we see ways in one day attack exploiting software and vulnerabilities due to the delayed update. Also, there are open source software and libraries that are unworkable with incidents almost daily, like we have announced about WordPress that was warning about plugin library takeover. It's take every day and it's the cyber supply chain. In the past year, we have experienced the need for rapid incident response abilities when receiving updates from supply regarding cyber events or vulnerabilities discovered within the system. Understanding the event scope through documentation and SCRM management tools is crucial for swift resolution. I think the most important things to implement are coordinated implementation with the supplier. This is the first thing. Require compliance with business regulation if needed. We need to do regulation and check that the supply will be under regulation. And minimizing supply access to organization resource to the necessary need. And if implementing this operation may not prevent the next supply chain incident, but they will be enable quick response and return to normalcy in case such an event is occurs.
Thank you, Sharon. Shina?
All right. Hello, everyone. Yes, first of all, also from my side, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Talking about cybersecurity, supply chain risk management in Tel Aviv at Israel Cyber Week is a pleasure and an honor, so thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. Shani, you already mentioned a big supply chain attack that has been a continued pain for Schneider Electric and for our suppliers, and that was the move-in attack that was, I think, first reported about a year ago. So even though it was reported a year ago, we still have suppliers coming to us all the time reporting data breaches, and you already mentioned the huge numbers of people that were affected, that had their data compromised, and companies who have had their sensitive data, their project files, their employee data compromised and exposed. So that's been a major attack that we're still dealing with to this day. Another attack that, thankfully it didn't become a full attack because it was discovered, but it's an important example of another supply chain vulnerability that we should pay attention to and keep our eyes on is supply chain attacks through open source. Just a couple months ago, there was an open source malicious backdoor introduced into a version of a very commonly used data compressor software called the XZUtil. And this was if it had been if it had not been discovered, thankfully it was discovered shortly after it was introduced. But if it had not been discovered, it would have been devastating because it's not only a very common software, but it's used in the very commonly used Linux operating system. So this is, again, just to give an example of how open source is always a complication in supply chain security controls. And something that would have affected us had it not thankfully been discovered, and is now since on the list of common vulnerabilities and exposures, and has not been widely adopted. So it was a close call, but a reminder that we need to pay attention. Again, all the more reason to pay attention to our supply chains, and especially to open source. And I think in general, I guess, Shani, you set the scene very well. There's just a rapid and significant increase in supply chain attacks and supply chain vulnerabilities. So it's really important that we're here today talking about it, and that more and more organizations think about how they can secure their own supply chains. We're all part of one big ecosystem. There's hardly any organization that is not part of a supply chain, so we all have a role to play. And until we all start playing our little role to protect the big chain that we're all part of, attacks will continue. So definitely agree in your introductory remarks, Shani. Just the main trend line is attacks are going up, and they're becoming more frequent and more devastating. As far as methods of resiliency and what organizations can do, I think starting with a very simple principle of cybersecurity in general, you can't protect what you don't know. So it starts with taking a simple inventory. Well, maybe not so simple if you're a company like Schneider Electric, that's massive, but taking an inventory of your assets, so your software assets, your cyber physical assets, your operational technology, your Internet of Things technology, understanding what you have. So first and foremost, take your inventory, but then for the supply chain protection part of it, once you understand what you have and what your inventory is, tie your inventory and your specific assets to the business functions that those assets help you implement and execute. And you can start to prioritize your assets based on how critical they are to your business. So how dependent are you on your payment system, on your billing, on Microsoft Teams? Once you look at all of your assets and you tie them to what they help you do as a business, you can start to rank order the criticality of those assets. And once you have that inventory and once you have an understanding of prioritization of how important those assets are to you, then you can start looking at the supplier of those assets and make your business continuity plans. Again, looking at the example of Microsoft Teams, we use it every day to communicate with our teams. We use it for internal calls, external calls. We use it to share news across our global organization. What happens if Microsoft Teams goes out for a day? How do we communicate with each other? What happens if it goes out for a month? What is our plan then? So a super critical tool. The risk is very high if we were to lose access to it. So we make business continuity plans and we think about alternative supply options if we lose access to a supplier or to an asset from a certain supplier. So that's the primary method of enhancement, again, starting with the inventory, the prioritization of how dependent you are on it, and then you can start to look at it vis-a-vis your suppliers who are actually providing those essential services.
Thank you, Sheila. And
Thank you very much. Thanks to my colleagues here, to everybody here. So I'll make it brief. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the industry, and I'm from Mastercard, by the way, in the recent years, specifically with the concept of supply chain risk management, is that if in the past we used to focus a lot on vendor risk management, right, or third-party risk management, we're seeing a much more significant move towards supply chain risk management. So understanding that, as mentioned before, things are dependent on each other, and there's a process and there's more of an ecosystem to the things. And then lastly, towards what I just mentioned, which is the ecosystem resilience assessment. So ecosystem resilience, much more than just individual vendor risk management, because of the threats that we're seeing. And one of the interesting trends that we've been experiencing in the past few years, and especially in the past year, is that if we had a lot of conversations and a lot of publications about APTs, right, very specific types of attacks with very specific objectives of getting to very specific types of assets in specific organizations, what we're seeing right now is that on top of that, there's also many more widespread types of attacks, right? So going after widespread, targeting as many vendors and as many entities as possible without a specific objective of getting to that organization's IP or that organization's critical data. But that type of a concept leads to the need for resilience assessment and resilience risk management, because you understand that now there is a much more dependency on multiple types of organization throughout your entire ecosystem. So that means that just assessing how good is that specific vendor doing, or how well is that specific supplier doing, and does it meet a specific framework that we are meeting as well, that we require them. The concept now, and we're seeing more and more of this from our customers and from our network, is that once understanding that we're part, as mentioned earlier, of an ecosystem, and understanding that there's many, many types of vulnerabilities and many types of attacks that could come in from multiple vendors and multiple entities throughout that ecosystem. So doing that asset identification and doing that ecosystem risk analysis brings the organizations to a much more, first of all, a much higher awareness of their risks, and allows them to also prioritize internally the types of actions that they can do in order to make their processes more resilient. And we keep saying resilient, and I think we'll talk about this even further in this conversation, but this is really that change, right? Of understanding that not everything will be blocked, right? Not every type of attack will be blocked. Not every type of vendor you can make sure that meets the specific types of regulation or requirements or frameworks that you need to have. And then you need to take and understand the implications on it on your organization, and how well can you bounce back? How well do you have replacements? And how well resilient is your organization to make sure that business continuity is met and that service continuity is met?
Thank you, Dan. Dalit?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Being last is difficult, so just adding my 5 cents. I think what we saw since October 7th, the significant increase in attacks on the Israeli sphere, wasn't specifically targeted at banks. So we experienced an increase, but we as a financial sector, and that is not quality, experienced an increase, but most of the increase wasn't targeted the financial sector. I think what is interesting is that we saw more ideologically motivated attacks, both on Israeli websites and pro-Israeli websites abroad. Most of the attacks were by DDoS tactics to disrupt, of course, the online services. We also saw a lot of government and healthcare systems that were attacked, like the state archives, Ziv Hospital, and other entities. We also saw, specifically on this context, more disinformation campaigns, spreading of false or misleading information, aiming to manipulate public opinion in Israel and to create social unrest and even terror. What we can do? So I think we should start with the basic cyber hygiene, as we usually call it, like patch management and deployment awareness. Second, as we understand, most of the attacks are DDoS attacks, specifically in our context of the war. So we need to make sure that we have solutions that mitigate the DDoS attacks. And I think and of course, making sure that our supply chain, and we'll talk about it throughout the panel, is secure as much as we can be.
Thank you, Dalit. In view of these descriptions of large-scale attacks, it is important to understand the regulatory framework which aims to enhance cyber resilience against these risks. Which supply chain-related guidelines, regulations, and recommendations are part of your framework, and what degree public and private stakeholders cooperate with these frameworks? Micha.
Hi, good morning. All of you right, first of all. I would like to mention some difference or how the financial ecosystem in Israel is a bit different from other sectors. First, in routine time, there is in Israel, and as far as I know, all of the world do the same, and they have the same problem and challenges that they face on the financial ecosystem. So in a routine time, there is 5 financial regulators in Israel, and each of them responsible to the specific sector. I am one of them that I'm sure that she will talk about it from the banking supervision. And but in crisis time, all of them need to cooperate and deal with the challenge together. And it's by law in routine time, it's a difference because there is a central bank, and there is a Ministry of Finance, and it is a different responsibility, and even the way of looking at the financial ecosystem is different. But in crisis time, there is only one solution that everybody can need and to work together. So, Ministry of Finance in Israel, if you know or if you don't know, we are not regulators. We are coordinators. And we establish, I think, a unique approach to the supply chain issue. That first, we establish a financial cyber center. It's part of the national CERT, and it's located on the same floor with all the other national CERT, and it's very, very good idea to do this, because I think most of the work and the relationship becoming through near the coffee machine, not on the mail, on the WhatsApp, and it's happened. If there is a problem, if we need some help, if we need some assistance from the communication Ministry, SOC, or 119 or whatever it should be, it can be done on the same floor. First. Second, I think it's also a very unique approach. We map the financial critical process with the field, with all the CISO, with all the regulators together, we work together, we map 5 major financial process and another 2 risks. And all the time that we are mapped, and I will be here in a minute about the supply chain company, we try to see which company or which service that somebody buy from someone is related to one of the critical financial process. If not, it's important, but not on the first day to do something with it. That's one key point. The other one is to ask, listen, and of course to do something with it, to listen to the field. We are mid, and part of our center, it's all the CISO and cyber analysts that are part of the group inside our financial cert, and we ask them what you need, what value we can bring to you, because I'm sure all of you know that the banking and the financial ecosystem, they have enough, most of them have enough resource to do a very good defense layers, few of them, but in some open windows, like that, they have a lake, and they need help from the national level or sectorial level. And we ask them, what you need from us? What we can do for you to do it better? And one of the major subjects that we are deal with, is to collect the company that related to the financial ecosystem, connect them to the financial cyber cert, and make with them. First of all, we are friends. We met them, we shake hands, we knock the door and said, hey, we're here for you. Of course, you remember, after we asked the CISOs, who is important for you? It's not for us, it's for you. So from one end, we collect companies and we make them friends. Second, we give them the opportunity to share information both sides. We send them information from the NCD, from our supplier, from the things that we collect together, and also from the international, of course, level. And we let them know that there is information. Second, they can call us and say, hey, we have a problem, we have a question, we need some help. And it's happened all the time. And the third, I think the most important and effective way is connect them to a system that we can be some kind of second layer for them and give them the opportunity, because again, it's not secret, a lot of the small supply chain companies, they don't have resources to do defense, they don't have stock, they don't have enough attention and resource to do it, and we give them some kind of national layer and information. It's not the first layer, it's the second one, and I think it will be the most important piece that we are faced with now, because it gives the opportunity to them to go from 0 to hero in 2 days or something. And for us, it will give, of course, for the regulator as well, it will give us the opportunity to see the holistic picture. So if we have 200 companies connected to the system, and I can see the picture on real time, so I can understand if the financial sector is in risk in immediate time, real time. So I think on behalf of INCD, that give us the opportunity to use the tool and to connect to the company and have the ability and the knowledge how to collect logs and what to do with them. We can give the companies a value every day. And the last one, before I will do it in a minute. Don't worry. I can talk hours, but I think because there is a lot of barrier on the market, how to do it with legal, resource, regulation, etc., etc. So we are trying to focus to give our supply chain companies a value and trust. So first, they can talk with us without fear that we will publish something or whatever. And the other one, they got value from us. As I said, if they connect to the system, if just they got information or trade intel that we can send them every day. I think I talked in the morning with the guys. Yesterday, I think in 11 and at the night, we got some information about vulnerability on the MOAT. In 2 minutes, all of them know. They got it on the WhatsApp. 2 minutes, 40 companies know what the problem is and they can handle it. Of course, of the sectors as well. Shani, you can move it. Thank you very much.
Sharon?
As a governmental office, we are subject to a number of guidelines and regulators. The INDA is the National Critical Israel National Leader is the National Critical Infrastructure guided by the INDA the cyber issues, and this including the supply chain management. Also, in addition, we are subject to the privacy protection law and other regulations, such as procurement regulations that also affect supply chains and matter. There are also various sectoral regulators, like the law on the database. If you are speaking about the corporate the stakeholders, this is probably can say, but we can solve it. Any requirement that requires budget, manpower, or time to fulfill is only prerogative to implement. We see this in offices that lack the resource to meet the guideline requirements, or in suppliers who seek certification on information security appendix in bids and questions regarding the supplier ability to comply with cybersecurity supply chain method. It's not easy, but with the government offices, it is possible to create goals and put them in annual work plan to implement these requirements. With the supplier, it's more complex because there are procurement regulations and the requirements are sometimes different from the cyber requirements. However, we do our best to ensure that suppliers meet the requirements.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. Aya?
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Shani, for inviting me to participate in this panel. So the banking supervision department fully recognized the significance of the cyber threat, and particularly those that are originating from the supply chain. And we do understand that the attackers are always looking for easier ways to access the targeted entities, and a lot of times it's through supply chain entities. So as early as 2015, when it was still much less tangible than today, our cyber defense regulation already addressed the need for cyber protection to be implemented in a cross-wide manner, including attention to relationships with external entities. But then over the years, and as you spoke here earlier today, this threat has intensified, and we see it materialize in a significant cyber attacks worldwide. So in 2018, we gave a specific focus on the issue of managing cyber risk against supply chain. And the intention was to strengthen and clarify the responsibility of the banking corporations that we are supervising regarding the establishment of a secure working configuration with the supply chain, and the need to manage the cyber risk that derive from it, particularly concerning significant suppliers in terms of cyber threats. I mean that supply chain entities that expose the organization to substantial cyber risks, and sometimes it's not a substantial supply entity for the business, but the organization should address this also. And since then, and given the dynamic of this field, we are continuously monitoring the developments in this area and making adjustments as required. For example, we understand that a broader view of the term supply chain should be taken and to connect it with the term of third parties and understanding that there are different types of supply chain entities, not just the ones that you have a contract with. So this is one of the focuses. And regarding the level of fairness of our regulations, so the supervised entities have, of course, adopted the directives and are giving a lot of effort in managing the risks that are related to supply chain. But about the cooperation of the suppliers themselves, they are not under our regulation, and there is challenges in this area. So one of our requirements in the regulation is the involvement of senior management in the organization, exactly for cases that the suppliers do not cooperate. And also here we recognize the great value and the great potential in collaboration with the other national entities such as the INCD and the financial sector.
Thank you, Aya. Dalit? Sorry, Sheila?
Sure. Well, I think firstly, I'll just comment on something you just said, Aya, which I think is really important, that suppliers are not necessarily people that we have contracts with in the first place. So we can buy sometimes just a one-off purchase of metal or electrical steel or something, and it doesn't mean we have a contract with them. So we can't necessarily put supply chain security terms into a contract. So contracts can be one way to ensure or improve supply chain security, but that's why it's so important to do this inventory and to understand what your assets are and to look at who the suppliers of those assets are, because it's not necessarily something that can be mitigated through a contract when you don't have a contract in the first place. Or open source is another example of that. There's no contract with the open source community. So you need to, consider how to protect your supply chain when there's not actually a contract in place. So I think that's a really good point. As far as guidelines and requirements and recommendations that you asked about, Shani, in your question, I'll just share some resources that we at Schneider Electric use. We use a lot of different resources, but I want to highlight a few important ones, a few of the biggest, and from our point of view, some of the most valuable. I want to start with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so an organization that's part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, but it's really, at this point, a global organization in so many ways. Their resources are translated into lots of languages, and I know a lot of companies and a lot of governments use NIST resources in their own policies and regulations. Even in one of the sessions here during Israel Cyber Week, I think the critical infrastructure session, I think it was, INCD, who talked about how INCD uses the NIST cybersecurity framework as one reference resource. And certainly that's the case with Schneider Electric also. NIST has, for example, the risk management framework. That's an overall, enterprise risk management framework. So it's not just specific to supply chain risk management, but helps organizations get a sense of overall how to manage risk. And a lot of those lessons and learnings can, of course, be applied to supply chain risk management. NIST also has documentation specifically for supply chain risk management. So there's a NIST document 800-161 for cybersecurity, supply chain risk management for organizations and systems. It's another one that we have used and embedded into our supply chain security program. And then another common one, I just referenced the cybersecurity framework. That is, it just went through a new update, and part of the update, one of the major changes that came through in the recent update that was just published a couple months ago is the inclusion of a lot more supply chain security controls. So that was, it was very good to see much more focus on supply chain security, and again, a reflection of the reality that supply chain risk management is becoming, or it is, the awareness is becoming more and more, which is great, and there are more and more resources being made available. One last thing on NIST, I think one of the greatest things that's most valuable about its resources is, first of all, they're free, which is always wonderful. So even startups, small businesses, small organizations can look at their resources and use them. It's also, NIST documents are also regularly updated. Again, the CSF, the cybersecurity framework, just went through an update. So they're updated on a regular basis to stay current and relevant. And they're always community-driven, collaboration-driven. So you asked about public-private coordination. NIST documentation is a great example of that. Their documents are always built through coordination with industry and government, and really anyone who wants to contribute to the formulation of those documents can do so. And then lastly, I find them very easy to read. When I first started my position at Schneider Electric, not coming from a cybersecurity background, I was reading all the cybersecurity documents that I could. And my mom and I read the cybersecurity framework together, and it actually made sense to us afterwards. So that's, I think, a testament to the clarity of NIST's resources. So even your mom can do it. So go ahead and use that. There are, of course, many other required regulations, or rather recommendations and pieces of guidance, ranging from free, like NIST. MITRE, a lot of people are familiar with the MITRE attack framework. MITRE also makes a systems of trust framework for supply chain risk management. And for organizations operating in critical infrastructure, like Schneider Electric, a lot of our technology goes into critical systems. There are also, paid standards that you can adopt, ISO standards for supply chain risk management, supply chain security standard. And I think even for smaller organizations, if smaller organizations are working in critical infrastructure, or if they're working in highly regulated sectors or sectors where there's a big focus on safety, so healthcare and energy, it can also be beneficial to get those, paid, slightly more advanced standards to demonstrate that you have a really robust supply chain security program. So yeah, those are some resources I wanted to go through. Like I said, we use those at Schneider, and a lot of them are also available and very valuable for smaller organizations as well.
Thank you, Sheila. In view of the significance of cooperative and collaborative approach between private and public stakeholders in such regulated frameworks, we also acknowledge the importance of collaboration between entities internationally. Supply chains are often involved stakeholders from countries with diverse cybersecurity regulations. What is the importance of having collaboration between countries with different standards and methodologies, including engagement with international suppliers? And can this cooperation generate special guidelines that will enhance security posture? Sheila.
Hello again. Yes, I think the most important message I want to share is that as new cyber and product security and supply chain security regulations appear throughout the world, the most important thing that we can all advocate for is mutual recognition and interoperability of these regulations. It's not really doing much to secure our digital world and our supply chains if every country has a different idea of what security means. So the more countries and governments can work together to establish one common idea of security, the more secure our world is. We all know it's an interconnected world. It's just not feasible and indeed not secure to have different understandings of what security actually means. So there are programs that we're seeing that we're at Schneider very supportive of, product security certification schemes and labeling schemes. Singapore has a cybersecurity labeling scheme. The US has a voluntary cyber trust mark that is being launched currently. Through the EU's Cyber Resilience Act, there's a certification scheme based on how risky or the use case of your products, with certification requirements for high risk technologies or products that are going into high risk settings like critical infrastructure. And then there are also private organizations or standards development organizations who are responding to this proliferation of different certification requirements or certification schemes. So the Connectivity Standards Alliance is another organization. They have created one unified global standard that is intended to meet all these different government requirements for product security. And it's great, actually, that there are requirements for product security. We want there to be requirements for product security. It's important that people can buy a product and trust it, especially if it's going into critical infrastructure. But again, to establish a common understanding, it's really important that those different schemes are mutually recognized and that governments work together to create interoperability or, through whatever mechanism, through trade agreements or through accepting common standards like the Connectivity Standards Alliance unified standard, by recognizing third-party standards. However, whatever the mechanism is to ensure that there's mutual recognition between those standards, it's just important that there is mutual recognition. It's obviously, we as a large global company, we benefit from that. But again, actually, everybody benefits from that by having one common unified definition for what security means, for what supply chain security means, product security, cyber security. So that is my one call to action, mutual recognition. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Sheila. Dan?
Thanks. So a couple of things to add on top of that, so which I think everything was spot on, right? So we see still a lot of value, as we discussed, in the knowledge sharing, right? The ISAC organizations, right, in financial services, in healthcare, in government. So the fact that organizations from multiple countries can still engage with each other on a professional level, and not just for business and sales purposes, right? To actually share knowledge, to share experience, beyond just the tactical level of this is the type of attack that we're seeing and this is the way that we solve that specific type of a threat, right? Processes within an organization that have been beneficial for multiple organizations and that in that aspect then become more standardized or globalized. We see that as a huge potential and a huge value that is being brought to the market. Now, I can give another example, which we haven't discussed yet, that's happening on a multinational level in Europe, right? We just mentioned it, right? There's the Digital Operational Resiliency Act, which I think is a great example of the way that a multinational organization, in this case the EU, can actually provide processes, best practices, and also incentives for organizations to better their resilience, to better their overall management and monitoring of not just their internal processes, but also their providers, their critical suppliers, their ICT providers. And what I think is actually interesting in that case is that it doesn't only apply for me as an organization, right? Because I am a bank out of Germany, because I'm an issuer out of France. It also applies to the vendors themselves. So it puts a layer or a specific, or let's call it a baseline of shared processes and shared security in a way, right? Because we all know, and I hope the colleagues here would say as well, not in all cases regulation or standards equal security, right? That's a challenge that we're seeing in many cases. In this case, I think because that there's processes involved, there's best practices, and also there's knowledge sharing within the regulation itself, I think that's something that's very beneficial that we see, coming up for our customers and then for our networks and for ourselves, obviously, as well. This is going to go live in January 2025. Another element which I think is really critical in that aspect also for the supply chain management is the fact that, again, going to the DORA regulation, it also includes simulations, right? So we talk a lot about processes, we talk a lot about making our organization secure and our vendors secure, but the fact that it also includes simulations and stress testing, right? So portfolio level stress testing of my entire ecosystem of vendors and my organization itself, and understanding what happens if there is, let's say, a widespread attack, right? What is the level of water, let's call it, that is currently there from a threat landscape perspective, and where do I need to keep my head right above the water? What do I need to do to keep my head above the water? Myself and my ecosystem of vendors and suppliers and so on. So there we see a lot of great value that is being brought from the regulator perspective to the actual market, because it connects it to actual processes that make sense to the organizations as well, and do not replace or become, let's call it, duplicate to other standards and frameworks. So that concept also allows us to handle consolidation risk, right? Which is something that we discuss quite a lot in supply chain risk management. How do I assess as an organization the level of, let's call it, over-dependency of my organization on suppliers that have shared threats, right? How do I assess the over-dependency, the consolidation of the risk that is coming from multiple locations? And I think through these processes of simulations and stress testing and actually assessing the threats and my resilience and my way of bouncing back, as I've mentioned, before they happen, I think these are critical elements that, well, they're critical elements to any organization, but coming in from a regulatory perspective, I think this is truly beneficial.
Thank you, Dan. As we all know, cyber is a team sport, especially in relation to supply chain methodologies, and many collaborations have been created between large entities and regulators, in particular under this rule. Collaborative work enables reduction of regulative overload of large suppliers in the Israeli economy, who are part of the supply chain of multiple entities, including critical state infrastructures, government ministries, and other sector-regulated entities, while reducing differentiality of standards of these cross-sector regulated suppliers. What is your position on the subject, and have you experienced improvement of practice due to the coordinated efforts between regulators in the last year? Sharon?
I think that there's been significant improvement in coordinated efforts among various regulators, and the need to work with consistent guidelines. We want to work with a lot of guidelines, and now we need to work with one guideline. The topic of supply chain is gaining momentum, and the entire economy understands the importance of collaborative work. Cyber security is not a solo effort. As we said, it's a requirement cooperation across different sectors. I think it's reflected in increasing awareness across industries, and it's meeting with various sectors. As my friend said, not every organization has the tools and knowledge to strengthen its cybersecurity resilience. It is essential to continue providing tools to support organizations so they can meet supply chain requirements. The supplier and organization want to comply with specific regulation once and not waste the resource each time to respond to requirements from different regulators. it's crucial to ensure that the requirements and controls demanded by each regulator are implemented and indeed provide the right response. I think that we can see that the new 1.4 IMCD supply method are improve and meet this need.
Thank you, Sharon. Micha?
First, standard is very important. I think it's the first step in the adopting of standards for the supply chain. It's a very good idea. Second, if we can see the governmental side of the problem, the challenge again, not the problem, it's as we saw it as Minister of Finance, we are looking on the financial impact that can be caused from each of the supply chain or other financial organization. And to do so and to deal with the challenge, we have two channels to bring the challenge up to the government. First, it's through the Stability Committee that located on the central bank, and the governor is the head of the committee, and our CEO is deputy. So there is a group that deal with cybersecurity inside the Stability Committee, so we can bring issues from the field and bring them up to the governmental level for the central bank. For Minister of Finance, our minister is the head of the financial cabinet. So if there is a governmental decision need to be taken from the code from cyber attack, our responsible to bring in the data, say, hey, this is a national problem. Let's take care about it, and we build some kind of mechanism that do it. But we need on real time to bring the data and build for ourselves the situation picture, that we will know what happened in each of the sectors. As I said before, there is 5 regulators on the financial ecosystem. So we are trying to deal with the challenge on 4 levels. One is the organization level. As I said, we are connected to all the banks, credit card company, insurance company, investment company, stock exchange, clearance, exchange, etc., and the supply chain company together. So we are one ecosystem, and we give them a value and information, as I said before. The second layer is the sectorial level, that we are working very closely with all the financial regulators in Israel, and we give them the opportunity that data that we collect, if it's cross the threshold that impact the sector, it's our job to tell them that there is a problem that cross on the sectorial level. On the national level, as I said before, through the central bank and Minister of Finance, we collect the information and bring them up for decision maker. And there is an international level that there is no cyber event or financial impact that starts in Israel and ends in Israel. It's global, of course, and the financial ecosystem is global in the system, in the process, or in the organization. And we need to collect all that information all around the world and see if there is some kind of event that can be impact on our national economic in Israel. And again, to bring it to our financial decision maker to see how we can deal with it. So the coordination between these 4 levels and these 2 pillars, central banks and Ministry of Finance, and in the international level, it's very, very important and crucial for to do it.
Thank you, Micha.
Aya?
So regarding cross-sector suppliers, we acknowledge the value in collaboration, and we encourage those kinds of collaboration, of course with the involvement of the national entities and by all the laws, by all relevant laws. And I think that a lot was done in the last couple of years in our sector specifically. and we encourage that the results of this kind of collaboration would be incorporated in as part of the risk management that each entity is holding regarding its suppliers. But there is challenges, and creating such a process is a challenge by itself. Again, I would say that the collaboration, this kind of collaboration can help creating the ecosystem that will help reducing the many-to-many relationships that are the complexities that exist today, and it will help to create synchronized processes that can generate a win-win situation for all the parties involved. So we are on the picture.
Okay. Thank you, Aya. In view of the significance of collaborations between all essential stakeholders of regulation on a national scale and internationally, we will now discuss the next step. How do you think it is possible to improve the level of protection of the organizations in a way which will minimize the threat from their supply chains? And what recommendations will be on your to-do and not to-do list based on your insights? In other words, what is the next step? Dan?
Thank you. So I'll be short here because I've mentioned some of these elements in the beginning. One of the good practice or best practice that we're now seeing that is very much recommended is changing that mindset. Right? We always used to talk about it. It used to be information security, then cyber security, now cyber risk management, and now we're getting towards the concept of cyber resilience, right? I keep mentioning that term. So that concept, right, that mindset within an organization of not just assessing a single entity as an individual, right? Whether it's my organization, a specific service, a specific vendor that I have, but understanding that we need to look at all of them as like an array of multiple types of elements that have different types of access to my organizations, that have different types of impacts on my business assets and business services and the types of services that I provide to my customers. Looking at it from not just a security perspective, but also from a business perspective, right? So translating that into decision maker level beyond the technical level, right? Moving from IT security to more business risk management and actually taking processes and best practices from risk management into security, right? And not just the other way around. So we see that as something that is becoming more and more common, let's call it, among organizations. And we see better resilience in organizations that have these types of discussions between security personnel, risk personnel, and business personnel, right? Whenever there's a good internal discussion, there's a good internal collaboration between these types of managers. So we see that there's much better resilience and much better understanding of what can be done. On top of that, as mentioned earlier, I think that we see more and more relevancy around the concept of crisis management or crisis simulation. You will be attacked. You will be attacked whether it's by an external attacker, an internal attacker. It might even be by mistake, right? But the fact that if you have processes, procedures, technology in place to make sure that you continue your business service, that you continue becoming resilient, that those are elements that we see that are becoming more and more critical for these organizations. And lastly, I think one of the concepts that is quite early in its maturity is the whole concept of, let's call it supply chain or ecosystem orchestration, right? So again, not just seeing things or managing things from a single perspective, but actually having, I'm not just saying dashboard, right? It's more of like a process or something like that, right? But we're seeing this more and more. Once managers, again, even non-technical managers, have a grasp and an understanding of how this impacts my business and how this impacts non-technical, non-IT processes to my organization, we see that as something that's becoming critical, and it might be in its infancy, but that's definitely the way forward.
Thank you, Dan. Dalit?
So first of all, I think that the more we increase our openness, the more we increase the risk. And just three major examples in the banking sector is the open banking that allows customers to share financial data with third-party applications, not necessarily suppliers and vendors that have any agreement with the bank. Also the cloud migration that moves sensitive data off premises, and the SaaS adoption that integrates third-party software into core operations. And when we heighten our dependence on the suppliers, their security weaknesses become our vulnerabilities. So what should we do? I think, and this is my personal opinion, it's not the bank's opinion, I like regulation. I think that it can make our world in cyber a better place. And I think the government in Israel should enforce more security requirements for critical infrastructure vendors, and this would push them to improve their cyber defenses. We will talk a little bit later about the questionnaire, but I think that if the government will decide that all vendors for critical infrastructure should get the certification for the questionnaires, it will make our work a lot easier, and it will not only benefit the critical infrastructure vendors, but it would raise the overall cybersecurity for the whole ecosystem.
Thank you, Dalit. Aya?
So I will address this in a multi-layered way. So first of all, I think that each organization should strengthen the defense against the realization of cyber threats through the supply chain. And I think that first of all, organizations should understand the necessity to address this threat, not just as a technological or cyber issue, but an organization-wide effort. And it means that it should be with the involvement and the integration of senior management and business units and the procurement and legal units that handle contracts when exist. And cyber teams should accompany these processes through the life cycle of the suppliers, even before it begins and of course when it ends. And I think that a significant defensive principle that should be implemented in this area is the minimizing attack surface to the greatest extent as possible. For example, maybe you don't need 10 different suppliers that giving you around the same thing, and maybe 3 is enough. And maybe you don't need to move all the data that you intended first, and you can minimize it a little bit. And of course, when when you end the contraction with the supplier, then to stop the network connections and to remove the permissions, and of course to delete all the data that is being held as a supplier. And I think also that the organization should incorporate this topic in the discussion with their cyber intelligence providers in order to be proactive and aware to what's happening in the area of the supply chain attacks. And even if the supplier should, by the contract, let you know when he is suffering a cyber event, maybe we'll hear it a little bit earlier. And also, of course, to learn from events that are happening around the world and to draw lessons and to be better ready. And I think that resilience, as Dan said, is the name of this game. But I think that not all just the organizations have a role here. I think the regulators also have a role. Dalit, thank you for saying that we like our regulation. I think it's important because it puts a spotlight on this issue, and I think sometimes it even helps the cyber teams to make it clear inside their organization. And of course, the national state is also a role player in this game, and they should find ways to to increase the resilience of the entire national supply chain and creating a more secure and protected supply chain environment for all the organizations operating in this area.
Thank you, Aya. Sharon?
The question is about the
Next step.
next step. I will begin with what not to do. I think, and I saw it working with a big company or a big suppliers. Even if it's a large international supplier that you think will not agree to your supply chain requirements, but if you decide that the service is critical, don't give up and think about how you can live with it. You will be surprised how big suppliers like Microsoft, Google, and even Schneider will willing to meet the requirements if you present it to them correctly. So don't say I will do nothing because it's Microsoft. I can tell them to check how I connect to Azure AD correctly. You can speak with them and explain your problem, and it can be solved. This is what not to do. What to do is, as we mentioned, now we do the cybersecurity measures all the time, all the event, work with SIEM and get all the events for the system and do anomaly detection to understand if something is wrong, third-party risk management. Of course, to do it, you need to to get the response plan good and to know how to work fast when something is going. And also engaging collaboration, information sharing is very important in the supply channel. Engaging information sharing, collaboration with industry peers, government agencies, and cybersecurity experts to stay updated on emerging threats and best practices.
Thank you, Sharon. Micha?
You know, each of the financial organization have a regulator, and the regulator it's like a parent. So they do tell the kids what to do, and it's good or bad, but they have a parent. And I think we need to adapt the supply chain sector. They don't have parent, and they need somebody to help them, and they support them, and they give them again value and trust. And that's what we try to do with our major supply chain, as I described it before, the crucial financial ecosystem. And again, we need to change our looking on their field and bring them on and say, you are part of the ecosystem. You are not a stranger. We are part of it. You can have the same information, the same knowledge, the same opportunity to defend yourself. And I think it's helped the ecosystem. As a country, I think we need to develop also tools and methods for the supply chain, and give them the opportunity to use them and have some value from, as we do with INCD, about a system that we can connect them and give them a value immediately from the country. It's free of charge, of course, for now. But I think this is the main important first step to do now, and of course to connect all the environment to the field, what the field needs. And I think we are on the right way.
Thank you, Micha. Sheila?
Sure. Well, firstly, I'll say it's always a good sign when when you agree with everything else that your panelists say, because it means you're probably going to say the same things in other places, and our message is getting to the right people. So I agree with everything everyone has said, especially on the point of security being now kind of to build this cyber resilient security is not just the role of security teams and everybody in the organization, from the business leaders to the developers to the procurement teams, the engineers. Everyone should have at least a fundamental understanding of cybersecurity, what they do in their role that contributes to cybersecurity and the cybersecurity of their supply chain. So on that note, one thing I think governments can do, I mentioned a lot of the guidance that we use from NIST, and it's good to hear that Israel's putting out this national vendor questionnaire. So it's good to see steps toward a kind of a common supply chain security framework or baseline controls. One thing that I think governments can do as a next step is use these resources that they're putting out, use these questionnaires and recommendations and pieces of guidance, and create trainings around them that are tailored to these different audiences. So we just said, security is no longer just the role of a security team. How does this national vendor questionnaire, how should a procurement team be using this? What questions should they be looking for? What should they be asking of their suppliers? How should business leaders be using this vendor questionnaire or NIST documentation, or again, whatever the resources? What should developers know about this vendor questionnaire? How does that affect their role? Is there something that R&D teams need to be aware of already related to supply chain security? So I think there's a role there for governments to use the resources that they already have and put it into a tangible kind of training that's tailored to different roles, so that everybody's on the same page about how their role contributes to cybersecurity and overall security of their supply chain. So that's one next step that's possible. Like I said, I think that's well placed for government to do. Another thing that I think is a really important next step is for every organization to know their suppliers. I mean, you mentioned this, being friends with your suppliers. We buy from our suppliers, we have contracts with them, but it's often kind of sign the contract, set it and forget it. There should really be much more sustained conversation and communication. So, have your supplier's phone number, go out for coffee every now and then, just, the basics of human interaction. It's really important to just keep up those relationships with your suppliers, so that when something comes up, or even when something does not come up, you just know who you're talking to, you know who you're working with. Building rapport with your suppliers is an important part of also securing your supply chain. And as part of that, I think another not to do is don't work with suppliers who can't provide you with trust and transparency. Trust and transparency is the thing that feeds a secure supply chain. So every supplier should be encouraged to demonstrate that they are trustworthy and that they have transparent processes. If they can't do that, then it's probably a sign that you shouldn't work with them. Maybe they need more time and to build their maturity, and that's okay, and we can support them to do that. But it's a bit of a red flag if they cannot demonstrate, their documentation that they have secure processes in place. That should be a warning to you that you should search for other suppliers. And then lastly, this is kind of maybe a call to action for startups. For anyone to put a supply chain security framework in place, but I know because we are in Startup Nation, and Schneider Electric works with a lot of startups, maybe for startups who are interested in working with large organizations like Schneider Electric, who care about supply chain security and have a very robust process for supply chain security. We seek supply chain security frameworks from our suppliers. I just said, we seek trust and transparency from our suppliers. Suppliers, regardless of their size, should be able to demonstrate in some way that they're trustworthy and that they have transparent, methodical practices in place. We understand that vulnerabilities exist. We don't have any expectation that there are no vulnerabilities. On the contrary, we expect vulnerabilities, and we know that no one is perfect. The important thing is having a methodical process for disclosures. we like to see disclosures regularly come to us because it means we can do something about it. So having a transparent process for disclosing vulnerabilities and for how you in turn as a supplier, as a startup, how you're handling your supply chain security, we seek that kind of documentation and we will ask you for it. So even if it's just a simple start to your supply chain security framework, put together a baseline cybersecurity supply chain risk management, supply chain security framework. Use some common basic controls. It sounds like maybe the national vendor questionnaire that's coming out has controls that you could choose from what applies to your business. That would be a good place to start. Curious to hear more about that. But again, just start somewhere and start documenting what you're doing to secure your supply chains. That's going to be really valuable for when you're going out and trying to work with companies like Schneider Electric. So that's my call to action for the startups out there.
Thank you, Sheila. As part of the next step, we consulted prominent cybersecurity experts of the banking industry and adjusted INCD's national questionnaire to the needs of suppliers from the banking and the credit card sector. Next month, INCD's supplier questionnaire will be published, including a customized model for the banking and credit card sector in the financial world. In your view, what is the significance and advantages of such customization and possibly additional model tailored to other sectors? What challenges do you think are likely to arise, and how do you think you will meet them? Dalit?
Okay, so first of all, as I explained, the regulation in Israel in the banking sector. So first of all, as I explained, the regulation in the banking industry in Israel actually mandates the banks to implement risk management in supply chain, and specifically to add controls in the supplier agreements, and again, based on the risk assessment. So what's happening actually? Each bank individually requesting questionnaires and bring penetration test companies to suppliers. First of all, Bank Hapoalim is doing this, and then a month later, Bank Discount is doing this, and a month later, other banks are doing this. And this leads to inefficiency because we duplicate our efforts and waste their resources. And there's also a burden on the suppliers because the supplier face redundant security inquiries, and this diverts time from the actual energy that we want him to put in security improvements. What we did in order to address these challenges, there was a collaborative effort, including the INCD, the credit card companies, the banks, the Ministry of Finance, and under the umbrella of the Bank of Israel. And we leveraged the INCD questionnaire. We used it and adapted it to align with the specific needs of the banking sector. And we used a risk-based approach. The questionnaire is structured with 3 levels of risk, allowing banks to tailor the security requirements based on the supplier services and associated risk profile. This was an extensive process. It took us 2 years to decide on the controls that need to be on the questionnaire. And specifically, it took some time to ensure that all the stakeholders, and there were many stakeholders in this collaborative process, that they will be involved and also will be on board. What are the benefits of the standardized approach? First of all, we improve efficiency. We streamline the process to reduce redundancy and to save the resources for both the banks and the suppliers. Second, we established a common language. Using the questionnaire eliminates the ambiguity. And if a certain bank or credit card company is seeking for additional control for a specific service or whatever, they can easily identify what is missing and do only the delta. As mentioned, it was tailored for the financial sector needs. ensuring that critical controls are addressed at the most basic level. And some of the requirements that seemed stringent to us were adjusted to facilitate the certification and to make sure that the suppliers will be able to get the certification. It also, of course, reduces the supplier burden. The supplier can respond to a single standardized questionnaire, and this will free resources for security improvement. And we believe that these practices with the suppliers, again, will elevate the overall cyber resilience of the banking sector. So we did a lot of work, but there's still many challenges ahead of us, and I actually think that the difficult part is ahead of us. Many challenges are ahead. So first of all, it's shifting responsibility. The bank and credit card responsibility for handling the risk management in supply chain is ours, and we need to rely on the certification. And this is a psychological hurdle for banks, because even if we delegate the controls, and this will make things much more efficient, still, if there will be a cyber breach, it will be our ultimate responsibility. Second, there are cost implications. Previously, the banks and the financial sector paid for this security assessments and penetration tests, and now the suppliers need to bear the cost of the certification and put their hand in their pockets. And also there might be potential security upgrades to meet the standard that will be even pricier. Another challenge is the market adoption. We need to educate the suppliers about the benefits and to somehow incentivize them to understand that the compliance is crucial. Another challenge is the standard implementation, because currently there are limited suppliers that adopted the standard, and actually we as the financial sector, we need to actively promote and assist suppliers in integrating these standards. If the standard was implemented, then it will be easier to just do the deltas according to the national standard. And another thing that is a challenge, usually it's inside the bank, is that we need to balance the security with the business needs. The procurement processes considerations are not just cybersecurity, of course, it's mostly about business feasibility. And this is why we didn't mandate certification and we don't plan to do it. And this allows the banks to be flexible and to use more business needs, but we highly encourage our procurement. We also need to build a plan that will implement this, but we encourage them to make some kind of differentiation to suppliers that will have this certification. Overall, I think that the standard approach will offer significant efficiency, but there's still, as I said, many challenges ahead.
Thank you, Dalit. Micha?
The best practice will help on the financial ecosystem to improve the resilience of our ecosystem, and it's important. It's a brave step to publish it, and I want the challenge, of course, will be to do the implementation among the supply chain companies and convince them to be part of it, and I'm sure because they got a value from the best practice, they will be part of it. And I would like to thank you, Dalit, for the team and all the team that work for a long time. Again, it's coordination between all of the people, to Shani and the ICD people, to the Ministry of Finance and our people, to do together and bring us to this step. So, congratulations for the best practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Micha. Aya?
And the regulator.
So I will be short. So we see this as the realization of the collaboration value that I was mentioning earlier, and we welcome and support the initiative of the questionnaire, and specifically one that is tailor-made for the banking sector, which we hope that will make it more applicable for the banking sector and the suppliers. And regarding the challenges, so I think that we should always remind ourselves that compliance is not a guarantee for resilience, and resilience is the part that we are putting effort on. So it can and should be combined in the process of the risk management of this issue, but it cannot stand by itself. And of course, all the challenges that Dalit and Micha said, and yes, and I also want to thank all the persons that was part of this long process. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. I would like to thank you, our distinguished panelists, for attending and sharing with us your knowledge and insight of supply chain, which is significantly essential in the creation of a supportive ecosystem for enhancing resilience across wide supply chains. As we heard today, we heard Sheila said that Schneider Electric experienced the attack, because it's you can see how much significant the supply chain attacks are, that they are still dealing with the exposed information that is still in the field. And they said like what the policy that they need to do when such a big supplier, or I can't say how much, like Microsoft, as you said, how to deal with it if it's not available for 1 day or maybe a month. So it's something that they're thinking of it, and something we should think it here too, how to deal with those situations. As Sharon said in this discussion about lots of guidelines that there are, that some of them are conflict instructions that can make confuse the suppliers. So they're trying to maximize the guidelines and make it as one as possible that can secure the government ministries. And as Dan said before, we heard that he's from the industry here and represented and said how much the ecosystem resilience is much more significant than to cooperate alone. And there is a need to make the assessments and the risk management, that it helps to prioritize the actions of the organization. And Aya said there are lots of challenges that to make regulations about suppliers, because you don't have the power of the regulation on those suppliers, just on the organizations. And we can see that, as the lead said, it's right connects to what I said on another question, that she thinks that regulation is the most valuable thing that can help Israel to be much more secure if the Bank of Israel will make much more regulations on this field to improve it. Micha said that the financial cyber center is part of the work of the financial office here in the Ministry of Israel to make much more cyber resilience on all these suppliers that we talked about. And it's really important to listen to the field to know what we want and what is important to do to the next step that we want to do as regulators and as big entities here in Israel. So, Israel National Cyber Directorate's National Supply Chain Method may be customized by sector. As seen today's discussion, we created the language customized of the banking and the credit card sector. Furthermore, we encourage other sectors to collaborate with INCDs, producing similar models customized to their needs. Any volunteers? Who is next? Thank you very much.